Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Freediving podcast, your source for information about training for freediving, not only so you can freedive better, but so you can live the most healthy and epic life possible. I am your host, Renee Blunden. I'm a competitive freediver and a freediver instructor trainer living in Dahab, Egypt. And this podcast represents the efforts of my own personal research and my trial and error from my freediving training, as well as the combined efforts of a public open source information network, which I invite you to join on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/freediving podcast. All are welcome. Feel free to check out the podcast page at reneeblunden.com/podcast. There you can also sign up for my new Friday 5 newsletter, which is my roundup of 5 facts, fun, and F-ups of the week. I try to include information that's interesting and inspiring and freediving related, so I think you will like it. And any questions and information can be sent to me at info@reneeblunden.com. Thank you all for listening. So I'm going to start today's episode with a quote by Sarah Campbell, who was the first woman to dive to 104 meters constant weight in training. So it was unofficial until Alessia set the record officially. Sarah said in an interview on freediveearth.com, "It's important for people to understand that the top freedivers are just human beings who learned how to learn. Nothing more, nothing less. They found their way through mental stresses and somehow understood how to address their fears and turn their failures into lessons and ultimately successes." And so today I'm going to continue on this topic of mental training for freediving. More specifically, I'll cover several different factors that can affect your motivation to train in freediving. And then at the end of the podcast, I'll answer the question, what motivates me to freedive? Just if you're interested to know. So first, just to recap a bit, in the last episode, I spoke about motivation for freediving just in general. What is motivation? Where does it come from? And why is it so important in freediving? And the reason why it's so important in freediving is because motivation will directly impact the level of success that you ultimately achieve in freediving. If you're motivated, then you'll put in the time and the effort necessary to train and to improve, and then you'll maintain your efforts for as long as it takes in order to achieve your goals. So if you're someone who's not very motivated, then you're not going to have that drive in you, that focus, and that strong desire to keep training day in and day out, month after month, and even year after year. Someone who's unmotivated typically won't be able to give 100% effort during their training. For example, he or she might shorten their trainings, do a couple of dives and then call it a day. Maybe they'll turn early a lot on their dives, or maybe they don't even show up at all that day and just skip training altogether. So a person lacking in motivation will probably never really be able to discover their true potential as a freediver. And so that's why I spoke about goal setting in the last episode, because that's really one of the best ways to get motivated as a freediving athlete. With clear goals and sub-goals, you'll know exactly where you want to go, and so then you can figure out what you can do right here and now that can get you closer to those goals. So if you haven't listened to episode 4, definitely check it out. But for now, I'll continue where I left off because I'd like to cover some of the other factors that can also help your motivation for training in freediving. And keep in mind, if you're someone who's already pretty motivated, then these things can help keep your motivation strong, especially when things get really difficult or if you have any setbacks. This way you can always keep moving forward and keep progressing in your freediving training. So, the first factor for motivation, which I think is one of the most important, is loving the grind. And if you can't love the grind, then at least accepting the grind. So in freediving training and also during competitions or record attempts, whatever it is that you're doing, you sometimes arrive at a point which is no longer all that fun. It's challenging, it's stressful, and it's just plain difficult. And this point is called the grind. So, just a quick example. The other day, I was doing a freediving session, and my goal was to increase my dive time. So for that training, I'll do 4 to 5 30-meter dives as slowly as I possibly can, trying to get the longest dive time that I possibly can, and each dive becoming longer and longer. So it's kind of like a static apnea, but you're diving very slowly. Anyway, this training for me is super challenging, and sometimes when I'm heading down on some of these dives, almost every cell in my body is telling me to stop and go up, this is gonna suck. But I don't, obviously. I just try to relax even more and try to stay in the moment and really just give it all my effort. So the grind is that point when the training gets super hard and tedious and tiring, and you just want to stop and give up. But you don't, because this is also the point when it really counts. It's the grind that separates the successful freediving athletes from the freedivers who don't achieve their goals or who don't progress very much in their training. A lot of freedivers, when they reach this point, they either ease up or they give up because it's just way too difficult and uncomfortable. But truly motivated freediving athletes, they reach the grind and they keep going. So Tanya Streeter, for example, who still holds the women's world record in no limits, she said in an interview on interviewswithinterestingpeople.com, quote, "Do you enjoy it is a tough question. There are moments on shallower dives or easier dives. Even just now, thinking of the sound climbing down a rope makes me happy, makes me excited. But the reality of it is that when you start pushing to or beyond your personal limits, let alone what our human limits may be, it's hard. Typically in the moment, we don't really enjoy the really, really hard trainings, It's hard. And then afterwards you say, oh, I enjoyed that. Whether for me, because I knew that a little bit more about myself." So it's Tanya Streeter. So in some major freediving competitions, you can watch the dive-eye footage of these incredible deep freedives, which make it seem like the life of an elite freediver seems to be this non-stop adventure, full of deep diving, traveling the world, just competing, freediving, and to some extent it is quite an adventure. But what you don't see on Dive Eye is all the years of grueling training sessions and the thousands of hours of pool training, depth training, static apnea, and dry training, and all of the various mental and physical preparations that freedivers do to prepare for these deep dives. So, for example, Alexei Molchanov, when he was interviewed in the book Specific Training for Freediving, he said, quote, "I have a specific and long-term training program. I focus on a well-defined goal with very clear macro cycles, although I tend to adapt them to how I feel and my immediate goals." And then he goes on to say, "I especially train by swimming, but I also do a bit of running and workouts at the gym. I have a trainer who sets up the workout table that complements this for the upcoming goals. My physical training is spread over a period of about 3 months with a lot of cardio and strength endurance work. When I am not close to the time for setting a record, I work a lot with hypercapnic and hypoxic tables in dynamics in the swimming pool. During this period, another typical workout consists of long distances, swimming or dynamic with monofin for 400 to 500 meters, minimizing recovery times. Close to the time of the record, I finalize the workouts. I still do a few hypercapnic and hypoxic series interspersed with max dives. In these max dives, I'm still able to get to 75% and to 95% of the goal that I will attempt for." So that's Alexei. And if we look at another example, Goran Kolak, he was also interviewed in the same book, and he describes his training program. Quote, "Broadly speaking, I start approximately 9 to 10 months before my goal for that season. The first phase of about 3 to 4 months is mainly made up of physical preparation. I train by swimming, running, and lifting weights." So kind of similar to Alexei. Then he says, then it follows a period of about 4 months of freediving workouts in the water, which I define as general specific training. In this part, I train all disciplines, static, dynamic, with and without fins. To conclude, I focus on a stage of very specific definition workouts before attempting the record. This part takes a little less than 2 months. The workout becomes much more specific and related to the discipline in which I will compete. The volume of the workout decreases and the performance load increases comparing to the previous phase. I have to get closer to my maximum, the goal needed to win the competition. And so with training programs like those, some of the most successful freediving athletes aren't necessarily always the people that have this like monster breath hold or a super strong dive response or the most amazing technique. Some of them do, but not all of them do. Many of them are simply the freedivers who are the best at staying motivated and who enjoy the grind. So keeping the motivation strong throughout the months of training, and especially in that last phase of the program when the dives are more max attempts or PB dives, the overall stress level in this moment is obviously a lot higher, and so this can be extremely taxing. So this is when a lot of freedivers, before they physically give out, they give out mentally. Harry Shamas wrote a bit about this on his blog at freedivepassion.com. He said, quote, "Living in Dahab, I see people come to train for anywhere between 1 week and 1 year. I'd like to keep an eye on everyone. There is always something to learn. What I see is that almost everyone overtrains to the point of burnout. Usually the result is performance dropping and total loss of motivation." He also goes on to say, quote, "Each decision you make needs to run through the filter. Quote, will this affect my dive? The dive is always lurking around in your consciousness, and with it a level of stress. After a certain period of this residual stress, you can become worn out by it and lose motivation," end quote. So something I've noticed is that top level freedivers, they keep their motivation strong by finding and discovering things that they love about the grind of training. They're not just freediving to get records or for competitions. For example, Davide Carrera, he said, quote, "I like to spend my time in the water. So I feel sometimes the more I stay in the water, the more I'm connected to the ocean. The easier it is, the more I flow, and the less I fight. And it starts to kind of flow." I don't know if you know about flow state. Yeah, when you let it go and you just feel an energy coming into your body and moving you freely, and you feel strong. But you know, it's not only your strength, let's say. It's like the force of Star Wars. So, then Alexei Molchanov, another example. There's just so many interviews with him on the internet, so that's why I have a lot of quotes from him. He said in an interview on Freedive Your Life, quote, "Competing, I'm very happy when I'm competing and training. I think I'm just hooked on the process. And I like the process because I was doing it since I was a kid, and I like the process of training, just to really seeing improvements, really seeing clear links with the workouts I do, different types of dives and repetitions, and how they make or resolve, which converts to deep dives. It's pretty cool." So obviously he loves the grind. You can tell both of them do. So the most successful freedivers enjoy the process and the training just as much as they enjoy the competitions and getting the records. They love this idea of pushing their limits and self-discovery and being challenged emotionally and physically. So a lot of sports psychologists will say that you have to love the grind. But that can obviously be a bit difficult sometimes, because except for some of like the top level and super highly motivated freediving athletes, love just isn't in the cards, because the training can be so difficult and so challenging that sometimes there's not always that much to love. So how you respond to the grind lies along this kind of spectrum, with loving the grind on one end and hating the grind on the other end. So if you're on the end of the spectrum where you hate the grind of freediving training, then you're probably not going to stay very motivated to train. Eventually you'll just stop and give up, because you can only stick to doing something that you hate doing for so long. So I'd suggest that you try not to hate the grind or love the grind, but that you just try and accept it as part of the deal in striving towards your goals in freediving. So the grind in freediving may not always be enjoyable or lovable, but what does feel good is seeing your hard work pay off and achieving your goals in the long run. So along with loving or accepting the grind, another factor for motivation in freediving is being positive and optimistic. And this goes for really all sports, obviously, not just freediving. In an article on theatlantic.com, it was titled "How Olympians Stay Motivated." And I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's written in the article that, quote, "In studies of Olympic athletes, it shows that having a sunny outlook helps their performance. It also helps athletes bounce back from defeat. Meanwhile, negative moods tend to hurt their performance. Another study showed that the most common definition of mental toughness that the athletes chose was, quote, having an unshakable belief in your ability to achieve competition goals. A lot of the Olympic athletes also believed they possessed, quote, unique qualities and abilities that made them better than their rivals. Terry McKeever, the head swimming coach at UC Berkeley, who's also trained Olympic swimmers, says in the article, everyone's going to fail or get beat or get injured or whatever. But successful athletes figure out how to reframe it so it can be a positive thing instead of a negative thing. Failure and setbacks and struggles are all where the good stuff happens if you can take that approach. So one of the most positive freedivers that I know personally, and who also has the strongest mind, I think, of anyone I know, is Sarah Campbell. She said in an interview with New Yorker magazine, quote, "You have to be able to trust yourself. It's okay. I've done a dive almost like this before, 4 meters different. I'll be able to get back. It feels like a long way up, but it's always going to. I don't look up until I sense that I'm 10 or 15 meters from the surface. While I'm rising, I'm concentrating on kicking, and I'm thinking how strong I am. I'm done. I have enough oxygen. Often there's the thought, and I'm very lucky if I can have this thought, that I'm the best in the world." So super positive, really good mindset. Sarah also has an online mental training course, which I highly recommend. You can find it at discoveryourdepths.com. Then another example of someone I know who's also always super happy and positive is Miguel Lozano. He was asked in an interview on Freedive Earth, do you want to dive deep? Do you want to put that time in? And his reply shows how positive he is. Yes, I don't have a real planning to organize this, but I want to learn what I did wrong, to do it better, to have time, to get stronger, to get deeper in a safer way, to train the parts that I don't usually train. This could make the difference. I'm going to do it, I think, progressively. I won't put any pressure on myself to do it. If I reach it, I do it, and that's my main focus. I go deep because I like it, but I'm not going to go crazy if I don't reach it again. I don't need world records to be happy, and he doesn't. He's just happy in his life in general. He's a very nice person. And then, of course, Alessia Zucchini, another person who's always super, super happy and positive. She was doing an interview with Freedive Your Life, and when asked the question, what is success for you? Alessia said, quote, "Something that you are happy because it doesn't depend on the competition, first, second, or third place or something, but something that you understand you do the best that you can, so you are happy to do it." So, point that I'm getting to is if you're an optimistic person and you generally run high on positive emotions and self-belief that you can do it, the motivation to freedive will just follow. And also being positive during the dive itself, this can be super important, and it can really kind of make or break your dive. Something Sarah Campbell said was, quote, "You commit to a dive or you don't. If any part of my mind has an awareness that I can turn, I probably will turn. For me, the process of a dive starts a week before the dive. If you start training yourself to think, I'll announce 100, but maybe I'll turn at 80, well, it only takes a split second to grab the line for a negative thought, and that's your dive." And then, just I think one more example here, Stig Pyrds, in the video Born to Freediving, he said, quote, "The reason why I'm not scared, maybe it's because I'm getting rid of everything. Every bad thought. I actually don't think about a lot of things when I'm down there. It's my girlfriend, it's my kids, it's the dogs, it's sunrise, something like that, and it cannot scare you. Now I'm getting more out of life, and showing my kids that you can do a lot of things if you set your mind up to it. Now, those are all examples of positive people. Well, what happens if someone has a negative attitude about freediving or just in general? Well, this factor alone, just because you have a negative attitude, can actually more easily lead to overtraining and burnout. Although in freediving there aren't many studies about this, we can reference some studies in other similar sports. For example, a study of college-age swimmers. This showed that the biggest factor in predicting burnout was, quote, the athlete's own devaluation of the sport, basically caring about the sport less or attributing negative qualities to it. So if you're negative, this can affect you going into burnout mode, even more so than any kind of physical exhaustion or setback. And then once you're overtrained, it can take weeks, sometimes months to start training again. You're just absolutely and totally shot mentally. And plus, nobody wants to dive with someone who has a negative attitude or who brings their own problems into the training sessions and then dampens everyone else's mood. Now, another thing you can do if you want to improve your motivation for freediving is to pick a competition. This is a bit rare, but there are some freediving athletes that don't enjoy training. They just kind of see it as a means to participate in a freediving competition or to achieve a record. And this is why when freedivers and athletes in general, when they retire or stop competing, they often stop training in the sport altogether. Basically, they don't train just for the fun of it, unless there's a competition or a record or something worth training for. And this is because by nature, we are all competitive animals. All you need to do is look at evolution and how humans needed to fight and compete for their own survival. So freediving competitions and records are what allows freedivers to excel at what by nature we are intended to do, to compete against others and to find a way to win. So not only do we have this inborn desire to compete, we also have a burning desire to win at things. A lot of us are largely motivated by wanting to be the best, not just another freediver, but the guy or the girl on the podium getting a medal, or the guy or the girl that rose to the top. So freedivers can really become motivated to train by signing up for a freediving competition, even if you've never done one before, well, especially if you haven't done one before, so that you can explore how you can be the best that you can be in this kind of situation. So freedivers in general differ enormously in what makes them happy. Each person has particular things about freediving which makes them happy, and some things are more important to them than other things. For some, it's competition, doing records and winning that are the greatest sources of happiness. And then for others, what makes them happy is spending time in the water, the sensations of the water, feeling competent, socializing, or something else may be more satisfying. So according to a 1993 study of top performers in the Psychological Review, quote, competitions provide short-term goals for specific improvements. At this point, the motivation to practice becomes so closely connected to the goal of becoming an expert performer and so integrated with the individual's daily life that motivation to practice, per se, cannot be easily assessed. So, some athletes in general just love to perform and to compete and to have the opportunity to be in the spotlight in front of an audience. And I know for me, a lot of mornings I've woken up feeling super tired and a little bit lazy, not really feeling like training that day. But then I remember that I have a competition in 2 weeks, and so that puts a bit of fire under my butt because of course I want to dive as deep as I can for that. So the fact that there's a competition ahead helps to get through some of the tough times and the grind, and helps remind you why you're working so hard, especially when you're not feeling that motivated. But then you look ahead and you imagine what the end result could be. Oh, maybe I could dive to X meters in the comp. Heck, maybe I could do a PB, or maybe win something or set a record, whatever it is. So just by imagining what you want to accomplish and then telling yourself that the only way you'll be able to do well in the competition is that you have to keep training and keep working hard. And you can even try and imagine the feelings of success and inspiration that you'll experience after doing the competition. This can also help distract you from the discomfort of the grind, and it can help you focus on what you want to achieve, so you'll be generating positive thoughts and emotions that will get you through the grind. And so that's where our minds can be pretty amazing and pretty powerful. So far we spoke about loving or accepting the grind, being positive, and signing up for a competition. So next I'm going to talk about using self-talk and rational thinking, which can also help your motivation for freediving. So let's say it's the night before, or maybe it's the morning of your max attempt dive. So you're planning to do a new PB and the nerves are starting to get the best of you. Self-talk and rational thinking is where you basically logically examine all of the potential stressors, and you determine what can be controlled and what can't. And then you talk yourself through the problems rationally. So you can do this like just in your mind, or if you want, you can write it on a piece of paper. Basically, you want to make a list of all the potential stressors and worries and thoughts about your dive. Then you go through one by one, keeping what you think is a good comment and disregarding what you think is not a good comment. So like, for example, a common concern that I hear is, what if I can't equalize? What if my mouthfeel doesn't work? Well, this is something you can try and do something about before your dive. Maybe try and sort it out with a coach, or do some dry training, and then disregard or just accept that it's going to be a potential issue on your dive. But let's just say it's something like, oh, I'm not good enough to do this dive. Probably this is something completely untrue. So you can rationalize this a bit and then completely disregard. William Trubridge wrote about his self-talk and rational thinking on his blog at williamtrubridge.com. And he wrote, quote, "In freediving, the nemesis is more a fear of failure or performance anxiety. When I felt the fluttering sensation that heralds this anxiety, I didn't shy away from it, but rather I looked for a concrete source in the present moment. And when I couldn't find one, it was further confirmation that nerves aren't real. Gradually, rather than being at the mercy of these nerves, I was able to keep them in control and brush them aside with a cursory thought, nerves aren't real." So you see, he sort of rationalized it in his mind, even wrote it out on his blog at some point, and then disregarded the thought. Also, Matt Molina uses self-talk. He said on dipanddive.com, quote, "I don't have any specific mantra. I deal with the thoughts that are coming, and there are many thoughts and fears. There is this technique of positive self-talk, so I just use that before and during the dive." So he doesn't go into much more detail than that, but still it gives you an idea. And you can also try to displace the weight of the competition or the weight of the dive by convincing yourself that it's all just for fun, like it's a game. Alexei Molchanov said in his interview, quote, "I had so many competitions already. I can deal with this stress and pressure in the way that I don't really care about it. It's a part of my lifestyle." And they say that maybe in other words, I really like diving. So in general, I really like everything associated with diving. So this is like competition, the atmosphere, all the people around. Some people are nervous, and I just like this general atmosphere. So I enjoy. It's like a game. If you lose, there is nothing bad that happens. If you don't do your dive, it doesn't really change anything. So another factor for freediving motivation is being able to stay in the moment, especially if you're someone that battles with performance anxiety before your target dives. This can really help. In the article on theatlantic.com, it talks about the requirements to become a Navy SEAL, how each person has to swim for 50 meters underwater without taking a breath. And it says, quote, "One trainer realized that the SEAL aspirants who are most likely to have trouble with this task are the ones who get intimidated and overwhelmed by it before they even try." So he began telling them to focus on executing each stroke individually instead of the entire 50-meter stretch. This recalibrates the brain to pay attention to the body's moment-by-moment change. And so a lot of the guys did much better than if they were beforehand saying, "Oh my God, I have to dive 50 meters." The article also says, quote, "If a particularly arduous training session were to seem overwhelming to an athlete, the brain's motivation centers might falter, and the person would feel like they just couldn't go on." And quote, "New research from the Opt-to-Brain Center suggests that the grape size section of the brain, called the insular cortex, is especially fine-tuned in top athletes, and this helps them to anticipate upcoming pressures and adapt to them quickly." So the insula can generate strikingly accurate predictions of how the body will feel in the next moment. And that model of the body's future condition instructs the other brain areas to initiate actions that are more tailored to coming demands than those of unsuccessful athletes or couch potatoes. This was written in an article by Sandra Upson in Scientific American. So, also people with greater insular activity were able to guess their heart rates more accurately and had faster reaction times. Paola said he didn't know whether athletes became gold medalists because they have a stronger insular cortices or vice versa, but he did say that the insular cortex, like the athlete, gets better with practice. So, just staying in the moment, this alone can help your motivation, not just in the short term, but also in the long term, because there are physiological changes in your brain just from this alone. Also, if you're in the moment, it can help deal with anxiety and the feeling of being overwhelmed before and also during your dive. A good example I found of this is David Mullins. He had an interview on Ocean Hunter, and he was actually asked what thoughts run through your head when you're doing a constant weight dive to 100 meters. he said, quote, "Before the dive and through the first 30 meters of the dive, there are always doubts. Seeing a line stretching 110 meters into the depths is a daunting sight. And when you're full of adrenaline, with your heart beating fast, it seems unthinkable that you could get down there and back on one breath. At that point, you need to let yourself be irrational, to let go of the doubt and dive regardless. After all, you made the decision to set the line at that depth the previous day, and this is no time to rethink it. I find that sense of recklessness is what lets me relax. Beyond the mental battle, the main focus is on the timing and the countdown and maintaining my technique. Balancing relaxation with technique is not easy, especially in the first few meters, which you need controlled power. Past about 50 meters, I'm committed, and all my focus is on equalizing, letting my chest relax under the pressure and keeping a controlled rhythm. So basically on the surface and during the descent of his dive, Dave's focus is fully in the moment on technique, on relaxation, equalizing. These are all things where he's like really present to what he's doing. So another thing that helps motivation is to have a good coach. It can be very difficult for some freedivers to stay motivated just on their own, to train consistently and to stay on the straight and narrow. For sure, there's going to be days that you just won't feel like training. And so having a coach can make a massive difference. Because no matter how hard you push yourself, you'll always work much harder and be a lot more motivated if you have someone there holding you accountable and also giving you feedback and direction. Some say that the coach can matter almost as much as the athlete. Also, the type of coach that you have can make a big difference. In that article on The Atlantic, it talks about a study that was done in 2000, which showed Division I athletes being more motivated when coaches weren't too easygoing or too strict. And here's a quote from the article. The coaches that had a more democratic style of instruction, rather than coaches with a more autocratic style who shouted orders with no explanation, it helps if the coach provides rationale for each point of feedback, and then this creates an internalization process which help athletes follow well-reasoned feedback. It enables athletes to connect the feedback to themselves, their training, and their goals. So that was from the article. Now, if you can't find a coach, or if you can't afford a coach, just having a regular training buddy can make a difference as well, because the chances are that one of you will be motivated on any given day. So even if you're not really psyched to train one day, you still show up because you know that your buddy is counting on you. So the best training buddy is someone you can train with regularly, ideally, and preferably someone that's around the same level of ability and with slightly similar goals. This way you can both sort of work together towards accomplishing each other's goals. Okay, so moving right along here. So another way to become more motivated for freediving is really just being curious, just focusing on your own like self-discovery and curiosity. I read about this in a lot of the interviews, which is why I wanted to talk about it. For example, Herbert Niche, he said in an interview, quote, "The only drive I ever had in going deeper and deeper was to explore the boundaries of my own limit. I enjoy nothing more than to explore how far and how deep I can go. In this pursuit, I discovered how human physiology and psychology work in union and learned how to interpret and influence them. So I thought that was very inspiring. And then Matt Molina also said, quote, I was curious about my body, what I can achieve. So I was gradually improving, but the championship was never an ultimate goal for me. I started from the very beginning and I wanted to improve, to see where it goes. That's why I still do it. It gives me motivation and a sense of purpose in my life. So that was also really nice. And then Sofia Gomez said in an interview with BBC Deportes that the most beautiful thing about the sport is, and she said, quote, you explore things that very few people can. It's a sense of great peace and tranquility, feeling the water pass through your body. When you go down, you do it alone. It's just you and your capabilities. Women are always looking to do things that are unconventional, that not everyone can do. That is what I like most about the sport, that I'm always breaking my own limits. So, yeah, some really nice quotes there, very inspiring. And so now we come to the last point, the last thing I'll talk about for motivation for freediving. And this is a very simple and easy one. And this is using motivational cues, such as inspirational phrases, which you've heard throughout this podcast, as well as photos. You can even use videos, because these things can help generate positive emotions associated with your efforts and with achieving your freediving goals. So what you can do if you come across a quote or a picture that moves you, you can place it where you can see it regularly, like in your bedroom or on the refrigerator door, and then look at it periodically and allow yourself to experience the emotions and the inspiration it creates in you. These little reminders and the emotions associated with them can help inspire and motivate you to continue to work hard towards your goals. I remember when I went to Stephen Tureau's apartment in France one time, he had a pretty small apartment, and it was just so awesomely decorated with freediving pictures and paraphernalia just everywhere. I think he had a French flag hanging up, a calendar with all of his competitions and trainings marked on it. And just being there, I remember it was a very motivating space. I'll have to ask him for a picture. So also just watching videos of freediving competitions, I find that really helps, or even watching videos about dolphins and whales. I think this can be pretty inspiring too. So we are at the end. So now I'll answer the question, what motivates me to freedive? So I'm motivated to freedive competitively by so many things, but the main reason being that I want to succeed at what I do. I want to be the best that I possibly can at freediving, and especially right now at free immersion freediving. Just the thought of being able to go to a world championship event, or one day maybe achieving a record, really lights me up. And also something that's always motivated me more than I think anything else is participating in freediving competitions. It totally fuels me during my training and gives me that added incentive to really focus and really train to be my best. I can also be pretty motivated just by the power of my own mind. When I'm progressing in my depth training, I get these like bursts of self-confidence, and the sort of drive that I get from this makes me just feel invincible in the depths. So I really believe that at least half of anyone's motivation is just a result of how they think. I also use visualization to help me prepare for my deep dives. Usually it's the last thing I do before I suit up. I'll sit down or lay down somewhere for 10 to 15 minutes and just start visualizing the dive in my mind. I'll see myself relaxing and breathing up on the surface and starting the dive, and then pulling down, doing my mouth fill, free falling, going deeper and deeper, taking the tag, pulling up, and then basically planning out the whole dive so that it finishes exactly the way that I want it to. And I also make sure that I eat right and that I try to stay positive, and I really think that positive thinking is one of the most powerful tools a freediver can use to have confidence for the dive. And fueling my body with the right nutrition, I think, is vital in order to get the absolute most out of yourself and to recover properly. I find when I'm thinking positively and eating healthy, and also when I'm doing my stretching the evening before my dives, I'm just like top of my game and able to dive very deep. Well, not very deep, but deep for me. So from the will to succeed to the love of freediving and the competing, I find that motivation is really just the result of a combination of factors, and it's so largely individual. So that concludes this episode of the podcast. In the next episode, I'll be talking about confidence for freediving and how to improve your confidence for your dives. So definitely be on the lookout for that. I hope to get it up within the next 2 or 3 weeks. And feel free to follow me on Instagram if you'd like, just by searching for my name, Renee Blunden. And if you haven't joined the Facebook group, I'd highly recommend it so that we can keep the conversation going during the week. You can find it by going to facebook.com/groups/freediving podcast. And something else I'm working on at the moment is a motivational dive visualization MP3 that will be free to download for my Friday 5 newsletter subscribers. So if you haven't signed up yet for Friday 5, be sure to do that on the website at www.reneeblunden.com. And that's it. Dive safe, and thank you all for listening.